Caravan magazine is headed to Normandy to commemorate the 74th anniversary of D-Day. We're taking a fabulous Caravelair Antarès 480 caravan as our accommodation, and we're crossing from Portsmouth to Caen on Brittany Ferry's amazing Normandy super ferry. Things were a bit different 74 years ago, as 130,000 Allied troops crossed the Channel, heading for a hellish battle on the beaches of Normandy.
I'm Will Hawkins, digital editor of Caravan magazine. Editor John Sootheran and I both have family involvement in D-Day. We're on a personal mission to find out what happened on those historic days around the 6th of June 1944.
We disembark with ease after a luxurious crossing and head straight for our 5-star campsite, La Côte de Nacre, near Wistreham. Then it's time to relax with a local speciality, cider.
The Caravelair Antarès 480 is a real home from home. 2 huge double beds, comfy lounging, a great shower room and a very user-friendly kitchen. We're here at Pegasus Bridge, which is a key site for the British D-Day landings. On the 5th of June 1944, 6 gliders came in with 180 paratroopers and took this bridge, a major part of the attack plan for the D-Day landings. When you get to Pegasus Bridge, you'll see these monuments here. These mark the spots where the British gliders landed, and you can see how close they were to where the Pegasus Bridge is behind me. It's an incredible feat of training and skill and endeavour for all these troops to get so close to Pegasus Bridge to then take it out. The first person killed in the British D-Day landings actions was a Lieutenant Den Brotheridge. We're going to go and see his grave. So here we are at Ronville, and very nearby is a British military cemetery, but what we've come to see here is Den Brotheridge's grave. He was the first British soldier to be killed on D-Day, and he lies here in the churchyard rather than the main British cemetery next door. And there's a little plaque here commemorating the fact he was the first British soldier who was shot. After breakfast at the campsite, we headed to another of the major D-Day locations.
This is the Merville Battery. There are 4 concrete bunkers here. The casemates are 2 metres thick, made of steel and reinforced concrete, and they housed 100mm Skoda guns which could fire across the estuary to defend the German positions. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, 700 members of the 9th Parachute Battalion were dropped in the area to attack and neutralise this site. The day before D-Day, British Lancaster and Halifax bombers dropped 1,000 bombs on Merville. Unfortunately, none of the casemates were destroyed. A distant relation of mine, a 23-year-old pilot officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force, was involved in those bombing raids. Let me tell you about Arthur George Sootheran. Arthur was the Canadian Sootheran, a pilot officer of the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was stationed in Yorkshire, and his plane, J for Johnny, part of the 426 Thunderbird Squadron, crashed following a mission to bomb a railway depot in Mayenne, France. 70 Halifax and 10 Lancaster bombers dropped 289 tons of bombs that early morning in June to obstruct German reinforcements and supplies reaching Normandy. At 4:10 a.m. on the 9th of June, after a successful mission, Arthur's Halifax approached RAF Linton-on-Ouse. The weather was terrible and they were told to divert to Nuts Corner in Northern Ireland, but the plane didn't have enough fuel, so on seeing a break in the cloud, the pilot attempted to land. He lowered the undercarriage and was in a slow glide at 800 feet when the number 2 cylinder suddenly blew off the starboard inner engine, causing engine failure and a wing fire. At such low altitude there wasn't time to react and the bomber plunged into houses in Newton-on-Ouse, completely destroying one of them. Arthur George Sootheran died, aged just 23, on the 9th of June 1944, having given his all for the liberation of Europe. He and the Canadian crew who perished with him are buried in Stonefall Cemetery, Harrogate. This is the Caen Memorial Museum. It's on the northwest side of the city, about 20 kilometres from the coast, and it's well worth a visit. Let's head inside to see what's on offer. Central foyer of the Caen Memorial is a fantastic model of a Hawker Typhoon. It's not the real thing, but it's based on a plane that was shot down during the D-Day attacks. The pilot was killed and is buried nearby.
The memorial is built above the original command bunkers used by the Germans throughout the invasion. Allow 20 minutes to wander through these to see the fascinating exhibits. Technology, telecommunications and weaponry would have been state-of-the-art at the time and imbued the Nazi troops with a real sense of invincibility. The museum also houses permanent and touring exhibitions. Currently there's a thought-provoking and fascinating Cold War exhibition which transports us back to our 1980s childhoods and will take others back even further.
The Caen Memorial has a real Trabant car on display. It's built like a tank. It's also got real chunks of the Berlin Wall. On day 4, we headed to Sword Beach, where British soldiers landed close to Wistreham. 74 years ago today, over 25,000 British troops landed on this beach. Those young troops faced huge German defences. Machine gun nests were planted all the way along the coast and they were raked with bullets as they ran up the beach. Further west along the coast, we visited the amazing Long-sur-Mer gun battery.
We're here at Long-sur-Mer, where there is a German battery, as you can see behind me. There are several of these enormous guns. This one is pointed out to sea to fend off Allied ships in the Second World War. Above me you can see about 2 or 3 metres of concrete, and to the sides as well. So these were immense pieces of defence built by the German army. Before D-Day, part of my grandfather's job was planning for naval gunfire. And part of the typical sites he was aiming at were sites like this at Long-sur-Mer. These casements were prime targets for the Royal Navy to fire at and destroy if they could. My grandpa, Guy Hawkins, was a Royal Navy officer in World War II. He had a crucial role in the Normandy landings on 6 June 1944. He was Fleet Gunnery Officer for Operation Neptune, the naval element of the plan, Operation Overlord. His role was to plan naval gunfire for the landings. Guy Hawkins was the chief architect behind the greatest naval bombardment in history. To enable the troops to get ashore, the Allied navies had to bombard the German positions. The bombardment would have to either keep the Germans pinned down so they could not fire at the Allied troops, or would have to destroy their positions. My grandpa needed to know where the Germans had placed their defences. He gathered intelligence from RAF reconnaissance flights, resistance fighters and special forces troops. He selected targets for the navies to shell and the RAF to bomb. The Allies used over 1,200 combat ships on D-Day. John and I visited some typical targets which were on the receiving end of Grandpa's planning. After the initial bombing raids on D-Day, the naval shelling began. A French cruiser with 9 155mm guns and an American battleship, the Arkansas, with its 12 305mm guns, began to fire at the battery. Later, British cruisers HMS Argonaut and HMS Ajax disabled 3 of the guns, but only after the Germans had fired 170 shells from the battery at the Allies. My grandpa's part in the D-Day landings helped make Operation Overlord a success. He said afterwards he was amazed then and later at how the Allies fooled the Germans on the location of the invasion. When you visit the D-Day beaches, you too will be amazed at what the Allies achieved on that day when you see what they faced. Another point about this casement, this gun site, which is pointed to me, was that it was taken by the Devonshire Regiment, my old regiment, as you can see from this plaque up here.
I'm here in the German command post, just a few metres back from the edge of the cliff at Long-sur-Mer. Back in 1944, lookouts would have been here with their binoculars, staring out to sea. Suddenly, out of the mist, they'd have seen several ships looming. First 2, 3, 4, then a dozen, and then suddenly hundreds of ships coming towards them. At first, these young and old soldiers would have felt invincible in this concrete encasement. But once the troops were on the beach, it would have been really frightening, just looking out through this slit, expecting a flamethrower or a hand grenade to be thrown in at any second. On day 5, we headed into the port town of Wistreham to visit the Grand Bunker. It may be an eyesore in a pretty residential street, but this concrete block was arguably the highlight of our trip. This is an original command post in the Nazis' Normandy defences. Inside the 52-foot high tower are rooms recreated to look like they would have done during World War II, There's a generator room, air filtration system, kitchen, bunk room, command centre, armoury and a lookout post on the roof.
And so our D-Day trip came to an end. After 4 great days exploring the region and discovering the stories behind the D-Day invasion, we hitched up our brilliant home-from-home Antarès caravan and headed back to the port at Wistreham. Normandy may be defined by the bravery and sacrifice of 74 years ago, but there's so much more to this amazing region too. There's more than enough to keep couples and families engrossed for a week or longer. And with next year being the huge 75th anniversary of the invasion, there really has never been a better time to plan a visit.